I spent 10 years loving her. 10 years building memories, dreams, the life I thought might stretch forever. We met on a crisp autumn evening at a friend's college gathering. She wore a yellow scarf that framed her face, and her laugh was the kind of genuine thing that lingers in your memory. I remember thinking, she lights up a room. From that moment, everything felt easier. Our relationship grew steadily, solidly. First dates in cozy cafes, lazy Sunday mornings, road trips, and movie nights. We moved in together after 2 years, adopted a dog Milo and bought furniture we'd never grown tired of. We shared hopes, traveling the world, maybe opening a small bookstore someday, having kids in a house full of laughter. The small betrayals that come with comfort, leaving the cap off the toothpaste, hogging the blankets, felt trivial. They were part of the story, daisy give and take. We got married quietly, in a backyard surrounded by candles and string lights. 10 years later, I never stopped calling her my best friend. We celebrated anniversaries, fought about money and chores as all couples do, and held each other through grief when my mother passed, when her job fell apart, when Milo took his last breath. We weathered storms together. Or so I thought. It all started with a routine checkup. She had been complaining of some mild discomfort, so she went to the doctor. I stayed home, walked Milo around the block, picked up groceries. The day she got home, she seemed distant, quieter than usual. I asked if she was okay. She brushed past me, said she had a lot on her mind. That night over dinner, mashed potatoes and salmon we didn't eat. Instead, we talked about the upcoming holidays. I asked her to pick out a tree. She responded with a small laugh, like someone struck a stranger. Then she paused and said, "They want me to come back in for more tests." My heart skipped a beat. Not because I feared the result, I trusted her, but because of her tone. It had weight. "What for?" I asked. "STD screening," she said, avoiding my eyes. My pulse quickened. That word STD, it was like a rock in my chest. My mind jumped to questions of fidelity, of trust, of the life I thought we had built. I asked her to pass me the salt, leaned away, tried to swallow air. Later that week, she went back for the tests. I stayed home again, wrapping Milo's leash around my fist as I paced in the late afternoon sun. When she returned, I could see how much she didn't want to tell me. She held an envelope in her hand like it was radioactive. I waited in silence. "He said it was positive," she whispered. My breath stuttered. My mind raced. For herpes, time seemed to freeze. A decade of love undermined in a moment. I remember the exact way I moved toward her, as if pulled. My hands shook. My voice was thin. "How many people view?" My question trailed off. "Shame, suspicion, heartache." She cried then, tears I hadn't seen since our wedding day. I wanted to reach out, to hold her, but I recoiled in fear and confusion. "I didn't. I just found out," she sobbed. "But this, it's not from me." Her voice cracked. "I swear I didn't know." The house felt too loud, too small, too full of memories tainted by doubt. I didn't sleep that night. I paced for hours, trying to gauge the love I had compared to the betrayal I imagined. She stayed on the couch, crying into a pillow to muffle the sound, afraid I'd hear her fear. I couldn't. The next morning, we sat across from each other at the breakfast table. Ashes of coffee between us, cuts of stale toast. She tried to explain her timeline, how she hadn't known, how she had recently started seeing a new doctor after being turned away at her regular clinic, how the test only then picked it up, how she had been faithful, how she loved me more than anything. My mind fought it. The stories I conjured, secret lovers, late-night meetings, whispers and lies. I wanted to scream. I wanted to flee. I wanted to believe her. Instead, I excused myself, walked out the door, drove until my phone died. I felt untethered. How could trust what feels as strong as steel snap so quickly? When I came back, I sat in my car and cried. For us, for the decade, for the promises I thought were truths. I cried for the fear of being damaged, for the stigma of infection, for the fear that my heart might never heal. Over the next weeks, conversations blurred into accusations, tears, therapy appointments. She would grab my hand sometimes, and I'd yank away. I shuddered in codependency, love tangled with suspicion. I wanted to trust her but couldn't. It got worse when I looked up the statistics: how herpes is common, can lie dormant, can be transmitted unknowingly. I found myself reading late at night, trying to reconcile science with the betrayal etched in my mind. But every source only made me more afraid. How could I let someone inside me, someone I loved, when someone else's past stood between us? She begged for space, for time, for me not to end what we had built. But to me, what we had built felt like a castle on sand. Finally, I told her I needed to take a break, to get tested myself, to see a counselor alone, to figure out if I could stay with someone who had silenced a decade with a secret. She nodded. I held her briefly. She wept. I left with nothing but my ring on the counter and a promise to figure out who I was without us. 3 months passed. I got tested negative. I processed my fear, my grief, my disappointment. I didn't hate her. I still loved her, in small pulses. But love isn't enough when trust is broken. I reached out occasionally. A text around Christmas, ADM after our top song on Spotify reminded me of her. But those bridges felt half-burned. One day, I got a message from her: I'm engaged. She'd begun dating again, begun building a new life. She wrote she was sorry for how everything ended, that she never meant to hurt me. I stared at the message for a long time. The ache surged, then receded a little. I replied, I wish you well. Goodbye. I deleted her from my contacts. Blocked the chat. I didn't want to relive it again. I've since healed. The scar remains. Occasionally, a song on the radio brings me back, a scent, a movie. I let them pass through me. Eventually peace follows. I didn't stay, because one test result awoke too many doubts. I didn't walk away because I stopped caring. I walked away because I started trusting myself again, trusted my right to protect my heart. I spent a decade loving her. Maybe I didn't deserve to lose that. But I deserved to choose what love was worth, what it needed to be, and to know that sometimes, trust lost cannot be rebuilt, even after everything you thought would last forever. Time has a strange way of softening edges. The pain doesn't disappear, it just becomes quieter, more manageable. After I blocked her, I expected some dramatic sense of closure, like the final scene of a movie. Instead, I felt hollow. Not because I regretted leaving, but because so much of my identity had been tied to loving her. For 10 years, she was my partner, my person, the one I turned to with every little detail of my day. Losing that anchor felt like stepping into a fog. I found myself reaching for my phone at odd hours, forgetting she wasn't there to answer. I still made too much coffee in the mornings, out of habit. I'd wake up expecting her next to me, only to be met by silence and an untouched pillow. At first, I filled the empty spaces with distractions: work, long walks, podcasts, hours spent scrolling through meaningless feeds just to avoid being alone with my thoughts. But eventually, the quiet started to feel like something else: freedom. Freedom to ask questions I had been too afraid to face. Who am I without her? What did I compromise to keep that marriage afloat? Was I clinging to her, or the idea of her? Those were hard questions. Sometimes the answers weren't kind, but they were honest. I started journaling. At first, it was just ranting. Ugly, raw, angry words that I never wanted anyone to read. But over time, the tone shifted. I began noticing my own patterns: the way I'd minimized my needs, the way I ignored my gut because I didn't want to rock the boat. I realized that the betrayal hadn't started with the test result. It had started long before, and all the moments I swallowed discomfort to keep peace. Her lie was the explosion, but the cracks had been forming for years. And that realization didn't make me hate her. In fact, it made me see her more clearly: flawed, scared, human. I still don't know if she cheated. I probably never will. But in the end, that answer became less important than I thought it would be. What mattered more was how I rebuilt myself after the damage. 6 months after the divorce, I moved. Not far, but far enough to make it feel like a reset. I found a small apartment with good light and started filling it with things that felt like me: old records, new books, a bike I hadn't ridden in years. I got a dog again, a rescue named Theo, who barked at squirrels and insisted on sleeping under the covers. He didn't replace Milo, but he reminded me that life moves forward, even when we don't feel ready. I reconnected with old friends I'd neglected during the marriage. It was humbling to admit that I drifted away, but they welcomed me back with warmth and open arms. We started a weekly game night, and those small routines became lifelines. I remembered how good it felt to laugh without reservation. Dating again was weird. At first, I wasn't ready. The idea of letting someone in, even just for a coffee, felt terrifying. But eventually, I dipped my toes back in. There were awkward first dates, a couple of short-lived connections, and one person who stayed around a little longer. Her name was Sam, and she was kind in a quiet, observant way. We didn't have fireworks, but we had honesty. And that felt revolutionary. I told her about my past, not all at once, but enough for her to understand where my walls came from. She didn't flinch. She listened. She asked thoughtful questions. And when I hesitated or pulled back, she gave me space without making me feel guilty. It wasn't the love I'd known before, it was something slower, steadier, built on mutual respect and shared vulnerability. I don't know what the future holds. Maybe Sam and I will build something lasting. Maybe we won't. But for the first time in a long while, I'm not afraid of what's next. I know that I can survive the worst days, the betrayals, the silences, and still come out whole. Scarred, yes, but whole. Sometimes I think back to that test result, the tiny piece of paper that changed everything. It shattered a version of my life I thought I wanted. But in the rubble, I found something I'd forgotten myself. I don't regret loving her. I don't regret the 10 years we had. But I've stopped romanticizing them. Love is not supposed to cost you your peace, your voice, your intuition. I gave so much of myself away, thinking that's what love required. Now, I know better. One choose differently now. I choose honesty, even when it's hard. I choose to speak up, to walk away when something feels wrong. I choose not to shrink myself to keep someone else comfortable. One test result destroyed the illusion, but it also gave me the push I needed to stop living halfway. And for that, strange as it sounds, I'm grateful. The gratitude I felt didn't come easily. It had to be earned through sleepless nights, through grief that settled in my chest like smoke, through peeling away all the layers of guilt and anger until I was left with something quiet and honest. I started going to therapy regularly. I used to think therapy was for people who couldn't handle things alone, but I realized how wrong I'd been. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is admit you need help. My therapist helped me untangle the web of everything I hadn't said during those 10 years of marriage. The compromises I didn't notice. The fear I'd buried. The way I ignored small betrayals because I didn't want to admit something might be wrong. She helped me see how I clung to certainty, to stability, even if it came at the cost of my voice. I wasn't just angry at her. I was angry at myself for not listening to that small voice that told me something didn't feel right, long before the test. But anger doesn't last forever. Eventually, it burns out and leaves space for clarity. One day, while cleaning out a drawer, I found an old photo of us taken on our 3rd anniversary. We were in the mountains, surrounded by fall colors, grinning into the camera like we had forever ahead of us. I didn't cry when I saw it. I didn't tear it up or throw it away. I just stared at it for a while, then slipped it into a box with other memories. I wasn't ready to throw them out, but I also wasn't letting them define me anymore. That's the thing about pain. It doesn't go away by pretending it never happened. It goes away by being acknowledged, felt, processed. And eventually, it becomes part of the story, not the whole story, just a chapter. I started writing again, something I hadn't done since college. Late at night, I'd sit by the window with a cup of tea and let the words spill out. Some of it was fiction, some journal entries I never intended to share. But it helped. Writing made sense of the chaos in my mind. It turned the rawness into something structured, something mine. Sam encouraged it. She never pushed me to be someone I wasn't. She didn't ask me to forget or move on faster than I was ready. She simply reminded me, in quiet ways, that I was allowed to take up space in my own life. And slowly, I did. I started sleeping better. I laughed more. I made peace with the silence in my home, because it was no longer empty, it was mine. I don't know what happened in her life after we said goodbye. I've never looked her up, never searched her name out of curiosity. That part of my life feels like a closed door, not slammed shut with anger, but gently latched with understanding. I wish her peace. I hope she found what she needed, even if it wasn't me. And as for me, I've stopped waiting for things to go back to how they were. I've stopped longing for a version of the past that no longer fits who I am. I've learned that healing doesn't mean returning to what was, it means learning how to live with what is. I trust myself now. I trust the lessons that came from being broken open. I trust that love can be real and kind and mutual, even if it takes time to find again. And most of all, I trust that I deserve that kind of love, not one built on denial or silence or assumptions, but on truth. When people ask me if I'm bitter about what happened, I tell them no. Because being shattered taught me how to rebuild. And what I've built brick by brick, word by word, is something stronger than what I lost. My story didn't end with that test result. It began there. And now, every day I wake up with the quiet joy of someone who made it through the fire and chose, against all odds, to live. Sometimes, when I walk through the park near my apartment, I see couples holding hands, laughing, stealing glances at each other like they've discovered a secret. I used to envy that. I used to wonder if I'd ever have it again, if trust, once broken, could ever be rebuilt with someone new. But now, I feel something else when I see it. Hope. Not because I think love is perfect. I know it's messy, complicated, full of risk. But I also know it's worth it when it's rooted in honesty, when both people show up fully, without hiding the hard parts of themselves. I've learned that vulnerability isn't weakness. It's the doorway to everything real. I still carry scars. I won't pretend I don't. But they remind me of what I've survived. They remind me that my story didn't end the day she handed me that envelope. It pivoted. And sometimes, the most unexpected turn is what leads you home. I'm not the same man I was when I stood at that altar, full of belief that love would always be enough. I'm older now, wiser. More careful, maybe. But also more open. More aware of what I need. And more willing to walk away from anything that asks me to be less than I am. I know now that love isn't about losing yourself in someone else. It's about standing beside them as your full self and letting them do the same. And if that kind of love finds me again, I'll be ready. Not because I've forgotten the pain, but because I've learned to carry it with grace. For now, I wake up each morning with quiet strength. I make my coffee. I walk the dot. I write. I build a life that feels good in my bones, even on the quiet days. And that's enough. That's more than enough. Sometimes, I catch myself standing in front of the mirror, studying the lines around my eyes, the silver beginning to streak through my hair. A few years ago, I might have felt like I was losing something. Now, I see someone who's earned every line, every change. This version of me has been through betrayal, yes, but he's also learned patience, self-respect, and the difference between being needed and being valued. I no longer chase after people who make me doubt my worth. I no longer shrink myself to keep the peace or play small just to feel chosen. Those days are gone. I still believe in love deeply, but I believe in loving myself first, in honoring the person I fought so hard to become. That's the foundation I'll build everything else on. And someday, if I find myself sitting across from someone new, someone who sees me, all of me, and chooses me with clear eyes, I'll know I'm ready. Not because I've forgotten the past, but because I've made peace with it. Until then, I'll keep living my truth. Quietly. Bravely. Authentically. Because in the end, the most powerful thing I've learned is this: even when someone betrays you, even when everything falls apart, you can survive it. You can rise from it. And you can still build a life that feels honest and good. Not in spite of what happened, but because you finally chose yourself. Last weekend, I sat on a bench by the lake, watching the sun drop slowly behind the horizon, the sky painted in streaks of orange and rose. Theo lay at my feet, breathing softly, eyes half closed in peace. The breeze was cool, but not cold just enough to make me pull my jacket tighter around my shoulders. There was a quiet stillness in that moment. No phone ringing. No past tugging at my sleeve. Just breath, sky, earth, and me. For so long, I thought I needed answers to move forward, proof, closure, an apology. But healing didn't come in a dramatic moment. It came slowly, in thousands of tiny decisions, the decision to let go, to forgive without forgetting, to keep showing up for myself when no one else could. That's what I carry with me now, not bitterness, not regret, but a quiet pride that I made it through. I used to think strength was about holding it together, about never breaking. Now I know that real strength is choosing to rebuild after everything falls apart, choosing to open your heart again, even when it was once shattered. And that's what I'll keep doing, one step, one day, one honest breath at a time.